We are here at the Scratch website, scratch.mit.edu, and we are going to make sure you're logged in, and then we are going to hit Create to open a new project. I'm going to name this My Recycle Game. What we're going to have is a recycle game. We're going to turn this sprite into an item that will be something that needs to be either recycled, composted, or thrown in the rubbish. This is going to change its costume randomly every 5 seconds. And within that 5 seconds, the user will have to drag it to the correct receptacle. And we'll have them lined up here as 3 other sprites. So we're going to have a recycle, a compost, and a rubbish. And what we'll do is have the user try to drag this sprite onto one of those 3 other sprites, and we will add or subtract from the score if they get it correct. So let's try that out. I am going to rename this item. It will be an item that we will be dragging, and I'm going to go over here to costumes and delete this costume. And what I'm going to do here is upload some pictures. I have a set of pictures for my recycle game. So here they are, items that are recyclable, some that are compostable, and some that are rubbish and can't be either composted or recycled. And these are just my examples. You can certainly add others if you have other ideas for other costumes, but what I'm going to do is add each of these as a new costume for our item. If I just click on this and click open. So this is very, very big, right? So I want to make it smaller. If I convert to vector, I can then edit it. And so what I can then do is click on it and make it smaller. We do want it to fit within the bounds of this drawing. Let's keep going. Just go through each one. Apple is good. Banana peel. Okay, so now you can see over here we've got all of our different costumes listed. We no longer need the cat, so I'm going to delete that costume. Now that I'm looking at this, I might make it a bit bigger to fit kind of the size of the other costumes. Notice that costume 1 is just a blank, and that's actually what we want our costume to be initially. Let's go to the code and do that. So we know that to get started with any Scratch program, we want it to start based on the green flag starting. With a costume, we can say switch a costume. And so if we click, it will switch to that costume. However, we want it to switch to a random costume, and we want it to keep changing. So unfortunately, we can't choose a random costume, but we can choose a random number. So we are going to make what's called a variable. A variable allows us to keep track of certain information that's going on in our project. And I'm going to rename my variable to random number. And what we want to do is to set our random number to, and under operators we have a pick a random number. Now what do we want to go from, 1 to 10? Let's look at our costumes. So if we look, each of our costumes is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have all the way to 10. We might say, yes, let's pick a random number from 1 to 10, but we don't want to include this blank costume. So that's going to be our starting costume, just blank. But otherwise, we want to pick a random number really from 2 to 10. So we're going to say from 2 to 10. Let's start with costume 1, which is our blank. Then we'll set our random number to pick a random number. And then what we can do is say, switch our costume to our random number. So we can switch a costume either by its name, so for instance Android or Apple, or its number. So we're going to pick a random number and change the costume based on that number. So let's do that. There's a bottle. If I run it again, so we are getting different random costumes each time. And we had said that we wanted to have it change every 5 seconds. So let's go to a control, and we can say, let's put this into a forever. And let's wait 5 seconds. Let's put this 3 for now, just to speed things up for the purposes of the tutorial, but we can change it to 5 later. So now let's try, and we've got our blank costume, then it's changing, and every 3 seconds it's changing to a different random costume, which is great. Let's stop that, and I'm actually going to make this quite smaller because we are going to be dragging this onto one of our 3 sprites. So we want to make sure it's small enough for dragging. So speaking of those sprites, let's add them now. We said we're going to have a recycle, a compostable, and a rubbish bin. So to add a new sprite, you go down here and say choose a new sprite, and I've got the images set, so I'm going to just say upload. And I've moved them into this folder, so I'm going to do my recycle. And this is going to go up here. Now it's way too big, so I'm going to say make this half the size. Rename this recycle. I'll add my second one, which is the compost. Again, let's make it small enough to fit. I think it's a little bit bigger than the other one, so let's do 45, maybe even 42. And I'm going to change the name to capital compost. And let's add our third, which is our rubbish bin. That's way too big, so let's try 40, maybe even 30, maybe even 28. Trying to give it equal spacing. And I'm going to just change this so it's capital rubbish. So now we have our 3 sprites, and we can drag our item onto the correct sprite. In the game, we need to check, are we dragging it onto the right sprite? So in Scratch, under the Sensing tab here, we can check if something's touching, and we can check if it's touching the mouse pointer, but also, is it touching another sprite? So for instance, we want the recycle, and this is going to go into an if. So we'd say, if I am touching the recycle, well, what do I want to do? Well, I want to increase my score. I don't have a score yet, so I'm going to make a variable. I'm going to call it score. And score is going to appear up here. I'm going to move it over to the right side. And what I can say is change score by 1 if it's touching. If we leave it like this, it only checks it once. In fact, it's not going to do anything because we are not within any kind of event. So I'm going to also start this when the green flag is checked, but I also want to keep checking this forever. Okay, so we're going to continue to check forever. Is the recycle touching this? But what if I put this on top? We don't want to give it a point, right? What we want to do is also check, is it the right kind of item going into the right bucket or sprite? So what we're going to do is make a list of each of the 3 types. So under variables, we can make a special kind of variable called a list. So I'm going to call my first one recyclables, make my next list compostables, and my third list are rubbish items, I'll say. Notice that they display them automatically, and right now we'll leave them displayed so we can see what we're going to do with them. So what we can do is add things to different items. So let's start with recyclables. What do we want to add? We want to add the names of the costumes because we're going to be checking them by the costume name. This is Android, Apple, Banana Peel. Android is recyclable. I'm going to go back here and say Android. And if I click it, see, it pops it into recyclables. Let me find another recyclable bottle in the cardboard box. Bottle, cardboard, and there's a dash. You need to spell these exactly so that they match the costume names. And we can stretch this out a bit so we can see it. What else do we have? We have newspaper, a plastic bottle, and a tin can. So newspaper, plastic bottle. Okay, so that's for the recyclables. For the compostables, I have an apple and a banana peel. So let's change this to compostables. Put in an apple and a banana. Now, if you make a mistake at any point, so say I said, oh, that's wrong, my banana peel's wrong. It goes by the number, so number 2. So if I said delete number 2 and click on it, it will delete it. So you can always fix it if you make a mistake. Okay, let me add that again. And then the only other one I have is the plate, and that's my only rubbish item. So I'm going to go to rubbish and plate. Okay, so now I've got my 3 lists set up. I don't think I need these anymore. I can always drag them back in, but I'll drag them out and get rid of them. I can check if an item, in this case I want recyclables, and so I'm going to add another control. In this one I'm going to drag an if then else. So an if will just check if this is true, if this is happening, that I'm touching the recycle, then do this. And it will only do this if this is true. And if then else, and I'm going to drag this in. So if recyclables contains, and so say for instance I want, in this case I want the costume that we're currently on, which is costume, and we're going by name, right? So the costume name. If recyclables contains the costume name, we want to do one thing, otherwise do something else. So if it is a recyclable, in this case, I want to change the score by 1. And if it's not, I want to subtract 1. And I'm going to put this whole thing in here. So let's just review what's happening. We're always going to check. First thing is it touching? I'm going to just make these variables invisible by unchecking them here so we can get back to our sprites. First question. Is my sprite touching recyclable? And then once that is checked, if that's true, then I would then check, well, is it one of the recyclables in the list? If it is, I'm going to add 1 to my score, otherwise I'm going to subtract 1 from my score. So in fact, let's check this. So, oh, and look at my score. Woohoo, go wild. Okay. So that's an issue. So what's happening is I keep checking this forever and I'm not pausing at all. So a couple of things. First, I want to move it back to the middle. And then I also want to change it to a new costume, right? I want to change the item. Once I've done it once, let's switch items and move it back. I'm going to use this broadcasting. So what a broadcast does is it broadcasts a message. So it tells another part of the project, I want to do something. I'm telling you something. So we want to say, and instead of just message 1, let's give it a good name. So let's say, I want you to change costume. So we can say broadcast change costume. And we'll do it here too. And we'll just make sure it's in here. So in both cases, we're going to change the costume. In fact, I'm going to just put it down here and only do it once. So now what we need is to figure out, well, when I get the message to change costume, what am I going to do? I'm going to do what I've already done up here. I'm going to grab a random number. I'm going to find a random number from 2 to 10 and change my costume. And the other thing we just said is we want to move back to the middle. So I'm going to go to, and to get back to the middle, it's 0, 0. That's the middle of our screen. So we're going to switch our costume, and maybe we'll do that first. Go back to 0, 0, and then grab a new costume. So let's go back here and make sure that we do that here as well. So let's try this again. Now the other thing is I've got this huge score. We want to make sure that when we start our game, we want to reset the score to 0. So let's do that. So score is 0. I wait 3 seconds. I get a new costume. I drag it. I've got a score. Oop, that was quick. Wrong. Right. Oops, see, so what's happening is, let me stop this. It's doing the changing of costume both when I drag something on top and every 3 seconds. And then we've also not taken care of compost or rubbish, right? So the only thing that's going to work for is recycle. So let's first fix that. Let's move this over here. And what I need to do is duplicate this. And I'll say if I'm touching compost, and then check if it's in the compostables. And then I can duplicate this again. And just make this smaller so we can see it. So we're going to say, is it touching rubbish, and is it a rubbish item? So that's one thing. Now let's take care of this issue with the every 3 seconds. Let's first change it to 5 and see if that helps us, because it just seems to be happening too fast. So let's do that. Let's start again. Plate. So this all seems to be working. I'll do an incorrect. Whoop. So we got to. Yep. So I want to make sure I'm losing points if I'm putting them on, and I still am getting the jumping, right? So. Oh, yeah. So let's stop there. And instead of doing this, just waiting 5 seconds, I'm going to make a new variable. And this I'm going to call the second counter. And I don't need to display it, but I will set it to 0 to start off. Instead of, let's take these out, and I'm going to in here change second counter by 1, and I want to do that every second. So that will be, I'll wait 1 second. Wait a second, increase second counter by 1, wait a second, and increase it by 1. What this will do is let us check this variable and see if 5 seconds have passed. So let's use an if, and I can go to operators, and there's a checking if something's equal. If my second counter is equal to 5, we don't want 50, we want 5. So if 5 seconds have passed, we want to then change the costume. The other thing we want to do is we want to make them lose a point, right? So we want to change their score by -1. So if within 5 seconds they don't drag it onto something, we'll change it and deduct 1 from their score. Okay, so I think this will prevent that little bit of sometimes in the middle of me dragging it, I am moving to the next costume. So let's try this and see if this works. So what I think is happening is I've got a little bit of sizing issues here. I'm going to go to my costumes and make these a bit smaller. What was the other one that was kind of big? The plate's kind of big, yeah. So I'm going to convert this, make them a bit smaller. I think the other ones are good sizes. Okay, let's see if this works now. So let's go back to the code. So I think some of the bigger ones, you know, if I was touching both of them, it was giving me an error. So I'm hoping now this would prevent that. So let's start over. Plate. Plate. Getting lots of plates. Okay, there we go. They're a more reasonable size. I think this works. Let's put that in the wrong place. Subtract. Newspaper. Yep, so it's okay. I think it's working now. It looks pretty good to me. Okay, so let's see. Oh, that's right. I need to check if it's going to subtract after 5 seconds. Oh, I know what I need to happen. I need to set, not only do I need to switch the costume, I need to reset my second counter back to 0. Each time I change the costume, let's reset the second counter so I start counting to 5 again. So I think that was the problem, is my second counter never got back to 0. So it was never equal to 5. Let's try again. Wait for 5 seconds. How is it doing that? Oh, I know why. The first time in, we are changing the score by 1. So I think what will help me with this is I'll go here, and then the first time in, it will automatically change the costume, and I think we'll start counting. So let's try that. So let's go, and let's wait. Okay, I'll lose a point now, and put that in the wrong place, lose a point. So now it seems to be working. Let's just check one more time. Does our 5 second take a point? And it does. So I think this is a pretty good working recycle game. So here's a few ideas for ways you can improve it. You can go to costumes and find some of your own costumes. I've only got one rubbish item, and I've only got a couple of compostables. Maybe if you could find some good images of different recyclable, compostable, and rubbish items, you can add those as new costumes. Just remember, think about what do we need to change in here once you add more costumes. Maybe think about the random number and think about your lists. You might have to update both of those things. Another thing you might think about, in addition to changing the score, you might add some sounds. So maybe a good happy sound if they get a correct answer, and a sad sound if they get the wrong answer. And maybe another sound, in this case where the 5 seconds are up, maybe some sort of a buzzer. So those are some ideas, but I'm sure you have some of your own. So go ahead, make some changes, and make this the best recycled game it can be.